Sangaria se no muanete Sanaria se na
It's my great pleasure to welcome Jill Carnduff today onto the summit. And Jill and I have many years of contact, and it's been a little bit intermittent recent years, but Jill's an extremely interesting coach based in Scotland. And so, you know, people have trouble with my accent, and I know for the fact that they find Scottish people's accent interesting as well, Jill. So Jill's going to talk to us about self-responsibility. So in Jill's coaching life, she helps people to actually find themselves, and in so doing, you know, there's an opportunity for people to become self-responsible, clearly, or it's an integral part of it. And you know, I'm very interested to hear what Jill's got to say to us on the topic. So welcome, Jill.
Well, great to be here, Neil, and nice to reconnect after our intermittent connection. So yeah, good to see you. Under not such great circumstances, however, but yeah, good to see you. Good to be here.
Well, it's an interesting thing, you know, the circumstances at the moment. You know, you were asking me off camera what the threads of the interviews were. And of course, people watching this, they can get access to the whole back catalogue of the interviews. There's something like 80 interviews there now, half in German and half in English. And really one of them is the tremendous opportunity that actually has sprung out of this you know, corona experience. So the actual experience around the virus and how everybody's handled it and the governments have done and all the rest of it. And there's an amazing consistency that people believe that we've been given. Like it's you know, if you're a religious person, you'd be calling it a God-given gift, you know, of this experience, you know, because it's really giving us an opportunity to look at things differently. So that's definitely another thread, Jill. Yeah.
Well, I mean, even on, you know, just taking that as a thing, it's like, what is it doing? What is it doing? I mean, the sense that I get is this, it's like this opportunity to look at oneself in the context of what's going on out there. You know, we're like in Scotland here, we are like most places, we're in lockdown. We've been in lockdown now for 2 months, and you're almost like given this opportunity to really look at yourself, because there's no distractions of the normal things that we distract ourselves with by going out and about and doing different things. You're almost being, it's like pressurized or forced into this situation where you either can choose to take a look at yourself or just, you know, ignore it and just rail against what's going on in some form or another, put some blame or something somewhere else, which I guess to me is like heightening what one of those threads that we talked about, which is self-responsibility, because we are being sort of, and it is a forcing almost. It's like to examine our emotions, which is one of the areas which I really I work strongly with, and where the method that I work with my clients comes involved with it, which is around the emotions. And it's that aspect of seeking out the opportunity in your emotions or feelings that are arising to a situation that is occurring either to yourself or someone close to you, or even if it is the outer community. But most often with the individuals I work with, I focus back down on what is going on with that self, what is going on with your response, your reaction. So I guess, you know, I see, and it's happening to myself, you know, under these circumstances where you're feeling things, and it's like, okay, so what's this about? Which is where I go immediately. It's like, what is this about? What is this trying to tell me about me? This response, this feeling, this reaction. And I guess so yeah, and I'm sure you know there's many in the interviews so far. I have a sort of, you know, I look at things from a four body perspective, i.e. a physical, mental, emotional, but the spiritual body as well, the aspects of the non-physical, and that aspects of then coming into our, you know, what we're here for, you know, what's my purpose, and you know, applying that to the situation in my world, where I then can say, well, what's the context for me? What is it that I do, and where is it for me? It just raises that up to a whole other level of like creating this opportunity for people to sort of go within, I guess, on many levels, to then go, gosh, you know, I'm responding, I'm reacting to this, or I don't have the, you know, the freedom to just go off and do it, you know, anything I want when I want. So then it's, what's it telling me about handling that by just being with myself or those in the household, and looking at the self, and it really brings it into sharp focus, which we can, without judgment on those who are not doing this process, you know, we choose to either take that opportunity and look at it and then examine it, or we don't. And we're just, for those that maybe aren't, it's that they're just not able to do that quite yet, if you like, in their journey. So yeah, it's interesting, because it feels like the situation has given us that opportunity to really look at the self first, and that then allows us to go to the responsibility aspect, which of course then is, by being isolating, we are being more responsible for those around us, as well as then looking at the opportunity of what's bringing up for us in that lockdown situation, to then, well, what's that teaching me? Where am I going to go with that type thing?
Well, look, it's very interesting to hear what you're saying. So what you're finding for yourself and for clients that you're working with is that they are definitely, you know, drifting more towards this notion of actually self-examination as a basis, you know, on the basis of the pressures that are going on. What I observe in the general population is that there's been a mass swing towards externalization. So it's all about, you know, where did the virus come from, who's responsible, what's happening to my job, you know, all this kind of stuff. And almost none of that is actually about looking at yourself and saying, well, what can I do about this? It's all about what's wrong out there. And I see a huge upswing in that. And I just wonder, you know, given the community that you're clearly involving yourself with in terms of your clients and your family and that type of thing, you know, well, am I right? Is there a sort of like a gaping chasm opening up between people who are awakening, and so looking at themselves, and the people who are, you know, would appear to be going, you know, further and further to sleep? And as you say, you know, without judgment, just looking at it, like obviously everybody's just making a response. But what are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I guess there is that concept that you tend to, or I observed this, that you draw communities that are kind of maybe on your page or almost on your page. So I've kind of got involved in some more online communities than I have done in the past. Because being a coach, I'm a people person, and I can do tend to like the whole physical contact with people, the energetic contact, at least in the space. So so I kind of it's interesting, gone a bit more and got involved with a couple of communities because of this situation. And in those communities, there is that aspect. I am seeing that. So it's like, okay, so your question is interesting, albeit, so my personal, if you like, contact that I'm having is definitely, there is more, people doing that. However, my non-personal communication, the news and the what we see, and you not so much even here with the people I'm speaking to, it is exactly as you describe. There is a lot of that. When I work with individuals, I'm very much aware of this whole, there is a process involved for each individual, and that I don't know whether it needs to go on longer for more of that to come into sharp focus, i.e. more people, to be like additionally forced, if you like, so there's a process that goes on that you then maybe like the whole grieving process of anger and then down into acceptance before you can come back up the other side. So I don't know whether then there is an aspect of how long this goes on, and then how it then alters as it goes on, as to whether the cycle that we have to go through, or those that maybe are on the edge of that awakening. I think you used the word, which I would potentially agree with, that are on the tip of that, that are almost there, that maybe there's a timeline, maybe the thing needs to go along longer. And I say, however, that even when things start to open up again, they may close back down again. So it's like, so that, yeah, I don't know, maybe there's a timing thing, maybe it just needs to go on a bit longer. Yeah.
No, it's curious, there's no doubt about that. And given the the evidence that keeps coming out around this virus and so on, and the response and the appropriateness of the response and that type of thing, those questions that you're raising get deeper and deeper, like what are we going to be allowed to actually engage in, really, going forward. So on yesterday, in fact, on the Sundowner, we did an interview. We were just looking at that, like the reduction in freedoms and so on, and how you can thrive, in that kind of basis. And clearly what you're seeing there is that there's no certainty about how the government's going to respond going forward, and it would only require another infection or something like that for it to be quite a different profile, like sociological profile. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about the impact on people's emotions. So you're looking at emotional health. Obviously you're talking about these different bodies that you are working with, which I think is a great way of actually looking at it. And one of the lovely things about this summit is that we've really had some tremendously diverse points of view, and ways of actually trying to explain what's going on. And it's out of all of that diversity, the curious thing is actually how much concordance has ended up being, with these fundamental things like being responsible for yourself. So tell us a little bit more about your work, and how people might apply it, or whether indeed they need to actually have support to apply it, or the lessons that could come from it.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's interesting. I'm just personally on a process of expanding the exposure, if you like, to what I do. It's very much a one-to-one situation at the moment. I've had some personal family life challenges probably for the last 10 years, and it's almost now, which is so ironic in the sense that, time to open up and we're being forced to lock down, but hey, there's a going with it. And what I then examine, and what is a key element of my process is this: what is the learning in the aspect and the thing that's been presented to you at this moment in time. So I guess where I work with, what I work with is that whole, there's a foundational premise by which I then come from, which is that belief that we are here to grow. Like, so, and in the language of spirit, it's like your soul, for want of another label to put on that thing that we can't physically measure or see, although I do believe there are aspects of science trying to do that very thing. The non-physical part of us that continues the cycle of birth and death, once the physical body goes, is like my premise is like, and my awakening was a remembering that this was the truth. This was a truth about what we're here to do is grow. The soul wants to grow. So from that premise is where I then help individuals, help people examine what that growth is going to be, what that growth is in their life. Now I use a different things to help with that. One of the tools that I use, which I'm in the process of expanding, is this thing called Soul Plan, a numerological tool, which we did your chart a few years ago, I believe. Can't remember the detail right now, but yeah, it was very interesting. I remember, and it's one of a number of tools, and it's that aspect of that all tools are the right tools, is where, which is something I've also been working through a learning of recently, particularly through just completing the yoga teacher training course, which is a completely different route to growth than the ones I had been used to. So yeah, anyway, so off tack as usual. So it's that fundamental premise. So one of the tools, as I say, is this Soul Plan tool, and the premise of that tool, being a numerological tool, is it presents a chart which presents in energy terms your soul's challenges, talents, goals, and soul destiny for this lifetime. Now, it's not a tool that tells you you're going to be a hairdresser or a banker or even an airplane, pilot. It talks in energy terms, in both worldly and spiritual energy terms. It's a very simple tool, but the depth of it, that I have, having been working it now for 7 years, just keeps kind of showing itself, I guess, to me as I use it. And in that, so that's one. So I say one of the tools that then you look at, and you almost get like this once you work through in particular challenges. Quite often show up and show the individual's chart, whose chart it is, patterns that they have been repeating in their life. So it's like there it is. There is the opportunity for recognizing there's something that I'm not quite learning here. There's something maybe I've not quite developed here, and it's so many times it's like a case of, oh my God, I've been doing that. That's so me, when they look at it, and then they get this. It's almost like a sense of allowing people to move from victimhood into empowerment, when if they take that premise and they look at their life and the situations that have occurred to go, well, I chose this. Like, this is kind of what I chose so that I could learn X. And the soul plan is just one tool that I use. I mean, one of my recent clients, we don't do soul plan, we don't do the theta healing, which is another modality that I use. We were just in a pure coaching state and looked at that premise. Well, what if you have chosen the experiences in this life to learn something? What if you were the one that chose your parents, chose the country that you were going to live in, chose the family, extended family, the situations, even the situations which you would, as a human ego, just go, nah, no, really? You're telling me I chose to be in an abusive relationship? And I have close friends and clients who have had these situations more than I can, ever anticipated to get these string of people. But once you just even open your mind up to that as a possibility, if it isn't in your belief system or your truth at that time, it suddenly and it shifts the energy. And I've seen it so many times with clients just suddenly go, oh my God. So they can stop the external stuff of like, this is, it's their fault, or they've made me do this, or that situation made me do this, or makes me feel that, and actually opens up that opportunity to go to let go of that and look at, well, actually, what is this thing that I am actually trying to learn here? What is this quality that I am trying to develop that will serve me in the very much the initial instance for people? It's like, how does this help me? How does this serve me? And then what I see is once they get that and they've moved past that, and we release the trauma and do the healing aspect, which is important, hugely important, they can then suddenly go, oh gosh, how can I then serve the wider humanity, humanity, in fact, to that level? And it just releases victim and then attack and shut down, which is the other thing that occurs. And I've seen so many times when I ask someone that question as we're exploring and digging down to go, what might that be trying to teach you about yourself? Often the first response is, well, oh, I'll never do that, or I'll steer away from that person, or I'll make sure I don't respond like that, or I should. And it's like they're stopping doing something, and it's almost like it's a defense. It's almost like that, and it's like, no, it's actually, it's like, let's look at that again another way. If you were looking at a positive quality that this was giving you an opportunity to develop, what might that positive quality be? So, and again, it needs, people can get there quicker or than others, or it needs a little bit more exploration, to again move them away from that defensive negative response, which is often a drawing away or a drawing back or a drawing in, to a opening up, an expansion and a development approach. And it's so wonderful to see when it happens, Wonderful.
It's wonderful to hear what you're talking about, and I can see the absolute practical application of it. So, so much of your work, obviously, from what you're saying, is about the practical applications of things. I have a philosophical question for you, though, and that the philosophical question sits behind, and that is, why would one soul need a different experience to another soul?
Excuse me. Good, great question. And as far as my level of understanding of the wider stuff, i.e. the spiritual creator, source, whatever you want to talk about it, what I believe is that aspect that many of us have been through many, many, many lives. So the soul itself has obviously had all of those many life experiences, and those many life experiences, and I've, for myself and many others, a lot of them are horrific experiences, you know. And even if we just look at our own, if we look at it in a linear way, which I do believe the whole process isn't linear, but being in this plane, we can only think linear. And you know, when we talk about everything's happening at the one time, that just kind of blows my mind a little bit too much. So I just, okay, that's as far as I can deal with is the linear aspect. If we look at the linear aspect, if we look at humanity and our own knowledge of history, which goes back, I'm not a history buff at all, but only goes back so far. There's even other, going back into things like Atlantis and Lemuria and all these kind of other things. But even if we look at our own history that most of us are aware of, you know, we're in like probably the most enlightened, it's all right, technology. You're forgiven. Enlightened state at the moment. You know, we're probably in the most enlightened, at least for us in the Western world, aspect of human existence. I mean, don't need to go that far back, and it's like horrendous, horrific, you know, physical, emotional stuff. So, point being that if we are as a soul, we're in incarnation now. We have been in incarnation many, many times. So the soul lessons have been different. They may actually have been the same if we haven't learnt it when we've gone and repeated. But there's been experiences that we've had, and you know, I guess most of us that potentially are open to this process, or even on the page of beginning to be open to this process, have had many, many experiences. So that therefore, when we are then looking at this life, you're looking at what the growth that the soul wants at this particular moment.
Okay.
You know, and what that soul's journey, one, you know, it's really about the individual themselves to get in touch with what that actually is. But hence, it's like focusing on the one now, which can which can be impacted by the others, and it might be an aspect to heal that, to move that forward, so that it clears that line, if you like. But it's like that's, and there's no judgment on what lesson it is. I mean, again, I guess this is something that comes up with my clients, that I'm very conscious and I don't even make an effort. It's just I just do it now, is to hold the space for that individual without judgment about how whether their lesson or their issue or their thing is any more. It's of equal value to someone else's, which may be ego. The ego will say is more dramatic. You know, i.e. someone who has been physically abused versus someone who's had a great life, but they just can't move forward to do something in their life at that moment. So it's like it's like no judgment on what the lesson is. It's as deep and as powerful and as difficult, whether it's perceived to be more dramatic for one person or another person.
Sure. Yeah. So look, you know, in here there's another 500 questions that arise out of what you're saying, and you know, what I could summarize from what you're saying is that these incarnations that you're working with your clients, with yourself, you know, that the stresses or, you know, struggles or you know, there's adversity of some kind or other in all of it, and you know, I could summarize that the soul is requiring you know, some kind of adversity now in this situation. And you know, you're also talking about the you know, the opportunities for learning that comes out of it. So my next philosophical question, sorry, I didn't mean to actually be heading down this track of philosophy, but you're leading me so nicely in this direction. But you know, why is it that there is this need for self-development, for self-improvement? Why is it that the soul just isn't, you know, perfect and able to resolve and be resolved? And you know, why does it need to actually be engaged in all the struggle?
It's a hugely good question. It's interesting. I've recently been reading sort of on that topic. in that, and certainly, so the reading that I've been doing around that is that what sits with me is like it's actually so big that it's really difficult as an individual, as an individual being, in soul in a physical body, to try and even conceive what it actually means. So let me expand a little bit. So if we take the premise that all that is say the source, and it's a source, that all that is like something, even if we think of galaxies and universes, and it's so hugely massive that we can't actually get the size of that in our brain and being the spirit in a physical body at this time. But if we say that then the source is so huge and so massive we can't conceive it, and we, for example, a cosmic day is where I've heard this term. Cosmic day is in fact something like 3.4 billion years, is equivalent of a cosmic day, and that the source's cosmic day has, of course, cosmic nights and days, and and we take that unit and think of our own lives, how many days and nights are in our own lives, and then just it becomes mind-blowingly huge and difficult to get any handle on. And that it may, let's say there was a decision to stop being just the source as one, and split itself up into lots of different parts of the source, little, and therefore souls, individual, even non-physical beings are also in that context. And this is all, of course, it's an idea. It's like something you can't measure or anything, and just consider as a possibility. Then it's like it wants to experience itself as individualized, so that it experiences and it knows more from the experience of being individual, so that when it comes back to being its unit, its whole, it's more than what it was. So it's like an expansionist by division, and then coming back again, and it's like an idea, because I don't really know the answer to that question. Of course, I don't know the answer to that question.
No, but it's really powerful when you're working with the soul purpose, like this notion of what is the purpose of the soul. And of course, what you're just actually outlining is supported by the majority of the esoteric religious schools. So, like, that esoteric knowledge, they all talk in similar veins, around aspects of it. And what I can say from myself, so like this is now talking from Neil, as I've been interviewing, these wonderful interviewees like yourself for this, the summit, and if I think to my long career of working with clients as well, is that the real results come out of tremendous struggle. And so the people with the biggest journeys, with the lumpiest journeys, they've got the most to offer. Time and again you see that. It's just like that's a universal principle. And so I look at it and I think, oh my God, look at the amount of suffering that's going on. And a lot of it's become quite conscious, and we're talking there earlier about these conscious decisions that people are coming to, whether they're going to wake up or not. It's all about struggle and effort. You've got to put that effort in to to thrive and to go forward. So it's an interesting one, very interesting. And I'm fascinated to hear you, what you're telling us about your experience with your clients, and like that commonality in that process. So
yeah, It's sorry. It's just it's interesting. You know, you're talking about like the most powerful things come from the struggle. I don't. You know, where I like to come from is not to put be too sort of rigid about a decision about that. For example, like all the most powerful ones, and it's like I feel it's like, again, back to the every path is the right path, and therefore the experiences that you have as a therapist with a group of clients and another therapist or another coach or another healer or whatever it is, they will have different experiences. In mine, I would say that hasn't been my experience, that it has to be a massive struggle. Yet I guess where I would want to say is that it's, so I'm going to almost contradict myself actually now, in the sense that it's the struggle is what you perceive it to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's, and I think maybe it then, for the person it appears to be a struggle. However, what my experience is, it's like you have to get over the hump. Now, it may be that some therapists, serve those that are absolutely getting over that hump, like really are at that massive, hugely horrendous struggle point. Whereas maybe others and then get exposed to that individual later on in their journey, where they've had those struggles, and they're then at a different place where there still is work to do, but the struggle isn't quite so hard, or and it's a objective or subjective, term, really, that measure of what that struggle is.
Well, the whole concept of whether the struggle is just that life's crashing you up, and I'm surviving, or whether the struggle is that I'm trying to wake up, and I'm lifting myself out. So you're talking about, as a therapist, seeing somebody who's right in the middle of being clouted around the ears by whatever's going on. That's totally different. Like the struggle or the effort or the energy that's applied is totally different in that experience to that energy, which is saying, I've had all that stuff going on in my life, and I'm, managed to resolve and heal quite a lot of those things. And, now it's time to really take another jump, like a different jump. And that's a totally different energy. So acknowledge that, and I really admire, what you're saying is that everybody's journey is the right journey. It's the right place. They're in the right place in the right time. So, next thing I just wanted to talk a little bit about is, and you're kind of actually talking in this area already, but when the coronavirus, the sort of pandemic very, very began in Wuhan, and the reports were coming out, I got sort of drawn into having a look at what was going on with the virus. And I'm one of these crazy people who talks to microbes. And anyway, the energy that I got from the virus and all the stuff sitting around it was that the common duality of the victim and the bully was becoming overpowering. And on a large scale, it was an opportunity for people to actually lift out of the duality. And I don't know if you've had this experience as well, Jill, but I certainly have with clients. They'll come along and they'll say, oh, I swing between this and that, and I want to get somewhere in the middle. And it's that idea of I want to be half yin and half yang, for example. It's crazy, like you want to be fully yin and fully yang, and do something about the harmony. But anyway, the interesting thing in there is that the reluctance of people to actually jump completely out of a duality. And so if we look at the duality that was sort of sitting in around this virus and the expression of it, and we've certainly seen it play out with everything that the governments have done and how all the big businesses operated and so on, is to really reinforce this victim and the bully. So like you guys, you're all victims and we're bullies, and then people get angry with each other, and so they start becoming bullies. And as we know, there's a bit of victim in every bully and a bit of bully in every victim. But the opportunity to actually jump out of that duality altogether and actually jump to a new experience, which is totally outside of that paradigm, is pretty, like, it's a pretty reluctant thing for people, to do that. It's and what you're talking about with your coaching and with these shifts that you're looking at in the soul's journey, there appears to be some threads there. So I just wonder, given that context, what you might have to say. You're welcome to say that I'm a nutcase if you want to.
Well, you are a nutcase, Neil, but you're a what we call in the UK eccentric,
Eccentric,
but I
okay.
love it. I love eccentrics. My dad was an eccentric, so he. Yeah, it's interesting because dualities, is something that I have really been drawn to learning more about, working with, and just getting bedded into some more of the foundations of the way I work about rising above duality, as a growth. And I do not like to use the word objective, but it's like an intention I have for myself some years ago, and add in as a dimension to the kind of things that I've already described that I do with people. But it's like I think the way it feels to me is that there is a progression through understanding that one has to go through before they can actually be ready to rise above a duality. I mean, from my own experience, when I first came across really the concept of duality, I used to go, well, you can't have one without the other, you can't have black without white, you can't have, the whole argument about you can't have light without dark, and that dark doesn't exist if there isn't light, and all those kind of aspects, and that whole thing that you need to be both bad and good at the same time, because you just can't know. I kind of was aware of that argument, but I didn't like the argument, because as an expansionist, as someone who is about helping growth and expansion, it did niggle, it grated with me, because I thought that can't be right. But it took my own development process, consciously clearing and shifting a lot of fears and bad old programs before I could even be ready to get what it meant to rise above duality, to sort of know and recognize that one was, because it's like it's like that process, and you have to, again, if you pass the right huff, so you don't have to, but it's like in that process of understanding, when one is in, say, the cycle that I take people through is like, right, so there's emotion there, like, what's it telling you about you? You examine what's underneath it, you name the lesson, you help name the quality, that in that process it goes through awareness to start with, that there is something that you want to shift, you want to change. There is then that process of acceptance, and this doesn't necessarily happen at that next stage. It might need analysis first and then acceptance, or sometimes the two join together. And the acceptance is the acceptance of the duality in the first place. So, for example, the inferior superior duality is a hugely common one, I think, but also very easy to kind of connect with, which is in the elements of victim bully. I mean, victim bully is almost the taking it to an extreme, inferior superior. But the inferior superior is like, if you feel inferior, you can't feel inferior without at some point feeling superior or having the desire to feel superior. The two cannot exist without each other. And it was one for me that I had a big learning on. Like, I don't feel superior to anybody at all. But then I would look at other people, big fancy coaches earning lots of money, and go, oh, I wish I was one of them. and then I kind of, oh, oops, oh, right, okay, I do feel a wee bit inferior. So if I feel inferior, that means I'll be feeling superior over someone else or some other person. So it took the time to be aware, maybe do a bit of analysis, and then settle into acceptance. And the acceptance is such a key part of the process that I like to take people through, which is full of the non-judgment. It's about learning non-judgment at acceptance. And once you're in acceptance, you can then just, it's sort of, instead of being that seesaw, you know, or the scale, that, you know, old image of the fancy scale, this it suddenly balances, and it almost then disappears. It's like like, because it's like you then suddenly realize, I don't need to be inferior, I don't need to be superior, I can just be. And it's like so much easier when you just be, because it takes all the energy to be inferior and superior and worry, you know, and everything around the, you know, inferior, I'm rubbish, I'm no good, I'm, you know, your self-worth, and the superior is like, oh, right, and then you can go into the bully, obviously, you know, so again, victim, bully. So in my experience, it takes a process to get to, and very much the acceptance is such a key stage, because acceptance literally creates the scale balanced, and it's only then at that stage can the conscious mind, because a lot of this is unconscious, as you brought it up, from the unconscious to the conscious, can suddenly go, oh, hey, right, now I know what it means when these mindful people talk about just be. You know, I know what it means when the Buddha talks about just being, you know. It's gone. So at that point, you're then free to transcend the duality, because it's then not important. It's of no value. It doesn't serve you any way at all. So that reluctance, I think, often is because either one of the dualities, and it can happen for the positive one and the negative one as we measure those aspects of maybe duality, because inferior, superior, you could argue one of them, but in fact, no, they're equally non-desirable. One of them will be serving you more than the other, and it's like, once you understand why is it serving you, what is it that it's serving you, and that can be a fear, it can be a trauma, it could be protection, any number of these things that, although they're negative, could be serving you. Once you recognize it's serving you, you can often just it just goes, because you just recognize it. It's the recognition of it. Sometimes you need to do a little bit more healing work on it. It's, you know, whether that's just a coaching healing, a consciousness healing and understanding, or whether it's some other woo-woo thing that you do, like I do with the theta, then it can go. And then it's just, so the duality then is you are then able to hold the duality. You're then able to be in the non-duality. But it's the serving, it's the prospect, it's the things that are serving, and people don't understand until they maybe open up to exploring and examining that there is something there that's serving them in that duality. So hence they want to hold on to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is this notion of being attached to suffering. You know, you're talking about Buddha and so on, and non-attachment and non-identification were the big keys to, you know, his message. And they're big things. Like it's huge.
And I thought, another thought is, sometimes people stay in the duality because it's community and it's identity. You know, it's like, very much, you know, and I'm, you know, immediately thinking of, you know, in the west of Scotland here in particular, we have two football teams, Rangers and Celtic, and it's like, you know, certainly, and it's very much more a male-driven need for community in this aspect. But it's like, so there's an example of, and behaviours on both sides can be outrageous. They're sectarian and they're awful, but therefore they're not positive behaviours. Yet it's like those two, and I've known individuals in both areas that they're holding on to the community aspect, which is actually then identity, and that comes back full circle, if you like, to what one of the goals that I have, one of my things I work with, is to help people understand who they actually are. Not the surface level of who they are, but the deep level of who they are, the soul level of who they are. And it's in that scenario is that they want to hold on to that identity, so they'll hold on to that duality. And in this case, it's like Rangers are shite, or excuse my language, or Celtic, whatever one it is. It's like they're bad, they're awful, they're terrible, we want it, and it gets it. So it feels like, the holding on can be to do with identity and community at the same.
So you've got here, like an important thing as well, which is identity. Identity is so commonly in a sleep phase associated with division and separation. So if we think about, for people in the rest of the world, it would be pretty hard to understand just how ingrained, that football culture is for Scottish people. And I know there's a religious sort of, component in there as well.
Yep.
And which is further sectarian. It's more about separation and so on. So like we're looking at the soul journey. Is the need for separation an aspect of a soul journey? Does that occur, or is that like our soul journey is actually necessarily lifting out of this kind of asleepness that we're talking about? Speak us through a bit of that.
Yeah, I would say in where I come from with it, I'd say yes, it is. How and why the whole thing came about, and I know we touched on it a little bit philosophically earlier, but it's like I find it really difficult to sort of really get a hold of it in this single individual brain. But so the aspect being the growth of the soul, the as you talked about, the journey of the soul, starts with the individualization process, doesn't it? In terms of, at least in that model, and it's like it's like the individualization is that unit that is the soul that we would then connect with the individual physical being, so that then it is part of the bigger, you could call soul, of source. So again, it's back. I think it feels like it's the same question that we were almost examining earlier. Is that why do that? Why have that separation? If I picked up your question rightly, I've maybe gone over tack a little bit, but.
Well, it really is important, because what you're identifying with all the football fans there is that they are finding a community, but the community is based on separation. So it's a community based on an us and them. It's not a community based on we are all one. There is no separation.
Yeah. So I guess so. Yeah. So what one might be able to see with that is that it's a group of souls who are going through a similar learning process, where they're, I always, my world, I bring it back down to the individual. So it's like those groups feel, again, the energies, you're drawn to similar energies, similar vibrations, as a lot of the community talks about it in those terms. So it's like they group together because they've all got that same level of learning, that's what's there in the need, as you say, which is there, we're better than you, or you're awful, so that whole, and you then expand that out to all the religious issues that have been through however number of centuries, and the division and everything. I mean, you start going there, it's there everywhere. You could almost group together similar learnings. So the group that is in that particular, I don't know, political philosophy, that excludes all other political philosophies, there's a learning there for them. The footballers, the
Sure.
radical Christians, the radical Muslim, whatever. It's the group, and they say, well, what's that group trying to learn? What's the souls within that group learning?
Okay, no, well, that's a great answer in a way that you're describing that. That's really very helpful, I'm sure, for people to actually recognise that. Very cool.
Again, yeah, and without judgment as to that learning, that's just is. It's just their learning, So yeah, to not then get into the "you're awful" headset is to just understand it, raise up the understanding to, okay, they've got a learning, so okay, understand that now. But I don't want to hate them. I'm not going to hate them because of that. It's just that's their learning. So what can be done to raise that vibration?
With all of this learning, like a big piece of what we've been talking about here is about seeing our way past hierarchies. So in other words, those rangers or those Celtic supporters, and so being able to get your way past all of that to the point where there actually is no hierarchy. And the reality is that we're just all football fans, and you guys like that team and I like this team. So that would be, being able to get past it to a non-hierarchical sort of a structure. Would you observe that in, the journey of the soul? So in other words, what's happening inside the journey of the soul, that there is necessarily patterns that would be followed, like in terms of the things that are needing to be learned, or is it just totally diverse and can it go anywhere?
Good question. Again, it's like initially my analytical brain would say, because I've been in analysis. No, sorry, that's not the right term. I have been an analyst, from my IT career back into this career, brought that through into what I do now. So the analyst would, by analysing it, would say that there is a pattern, and then yes, I think the answer would be yes. Those groups of souls, have the same pattern to work through. However, then the soul aspect of me, or the spiritual aspect, will come back in to say, well, it's just one element of a journey of that particular soul, and what so that therefore it's the uniqueness of the individual, the individual's journey. They have to, is then they work with that. What does it mean to them? And as soon as you draw a pattern, you then tend to extrapolate past the pattern that you're doing just for that one reason. And there's a danger, I think, in that.
Totally. Yeah.
You then extrapolate everybody then in that just for the sake of making it easier to understand. Then they're all like that, so they all need to go through the next process and the next. So let's force them through it. If you start thinking about Big Brother and so. And it's nice it's easier for the brain, it's easier to then try and do something, to fix, if you like, if that's where you start coming from. But yeah, so I think I'm going to listen to my more soul side of it. And it's, one bit of a larger thing which you can't just extrapolate out, applies to everybody.
Yeah. No, it's like there's some great humour in it. We could make a comedy show about the topic of, somebody not learning their lessons and their soul journey, and they're a Celtic supporter, and next time I've got to come back as a Rangers supporter.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's it's laughable at it, but it's reminding me of that story of Gandhi, or I saw it in the movie anyway, the movie Gandhi, where he, in the Indian wars, I think, that were going on at the time, he asked, a guy, I can't remember the whole story, but it was like his son had been killed by the other side, and he asked Gandhi, well, what can I do? What can I do to get through this or get through it? And then he says, take on the son of someone from the other side and bring them up, or go in their faith type thing. So it's like that whole, so it's a bit laughable and facetious and thinking about it, but actually there's maybe truth in that. Maybe that's what then occurs in the journey, in the karmic journey. And then, the karmic process is a whole other thing that we need to understandable at our level. But it's, yeah.
Well, it puts a new analysis on, this life's work that you've said about, really. That it's just a journey, and it's experiences that are needed. So you're here having these experiences, and if you can move away from seeing it as being, well, this is my trauma or my burden, my cross that I have to bear, and sort of contemplate it more as being, well, this is my stuff. This is what I've got to work with. Aren't I lucky to have these things to work with? Mm-hmm. That would be a different experience, wouldn't it?
Yeah, very much. And and there's lots of learning in just the process itself, rather than the content of the process, which is that whole, be kind to yourself, allow yourself that whatever it takes to get through the trauma, get through the thing that is a struggle, then allow yourself to, and not get caught up in judging yourself for not getting there faster, quicker, or that you compare yourself to someone else. So it's like, then again, that's another aspect of learning by virtue of going through the journey itself. The unconditional love, aspect of the self through the journey, the non-judgment aspect of learning, and so on and so forth. Yeah. All good stuff.
All good stuff. So tell me, I've asked this question recently of somebody else as well, but I feel to ask you the same question, Jill, and that is that if you had a magic wand that you could wave, into our culture and into the culture in Scotland, but the wider culture, what would the effect of that magic wand be? What would you wish for humanity?
I think I sort of see ourselves in an evolutionary process. It's the evolution of consciousness as it applies to living in the physical plane. And if you like to create a pattern, it's not so much a pattern, but just an easy way to look at it. It's like you've maybe got those at a higher level of vibrational understanding that can, and the super gurus or the Dalai Lamas of the world, or whatever person, whatever high spiritual aspect evolutionary being in a physical body looks like. You've got the next layer of those wanting to help those move through the journey, which you and many people in this summit are part of. And then there'll be people maybe just about to tip over, from the non-awakening to the awakening stage, if you like, that, we are all one, and that fundamentally, let's not hurt anyone, and we're all the same, and that's a paraphrasing version of let's not be nasty to anybody, and let's just love everybody, but be discerning about living on the planet. And then the mass of, maybe the mass who are just so lower down in the sense, and I hate using the words lower down, but maybe the smaller vibration that can't see any of that at all. I would wave a magic wand and lift everybody up into on the cusp of awakening. That's what I would do. Okay. It's just raise that vibration up for as many people as possible, and just get it so that we really do. And in fact, it may even be, okay, so I'm getting in my head, and this happens to me sometimes. Actually, I'm getting in my head that, in fact, this whole process of the coronavirus is like helping very much tip those over the top, over into the awakening scale. It's not even the right word, but tip over from being not quite awakened to awakened. And that then becomes a tipping point for the planet itself. because ultimately, and we haven't talked about what the impact is on the physical planet from all of what's going on, not just from the human beings on the planet, but of course there is that whole thing of planet healing going on that has become a bit of a default because of our lack of movement about the planet and everything else around that. But it's just so if that could just, and it feels like that's maybe what part of this process is about, because I think there's multiple dimensions to what it's about. The corona process, the thing that's going on, would be it's to help just tip that balance of the number of souls on the planet who are on the verge of awakening into awakening. Because then once they're there, you can't go back. My belief is you can't get back. You can't lose it. It's like eating ice cream. I always do this analogy. Is once you've had the taste of ice cream, you can't remove it from your being. You know what ice cream tastes like, so you want more ice cream. It's like you can't take it away. So, and it feels to me like awakenings are like that as well. So once that's there, we're all going to be all right. The planet's going to be fine.
That's a critical mass. So
that's the word. That's the words I was looking for. I couldn't find the words critical mass. Absolutely, that's it. Thank you, Neil. Yeah.
And that's so interesting that like there's the notion for you is that it literally requires enough people. So we were that Maharishi effect and that type of thing. So very interesting, very, very interesting. All right, well, Jill, if you've got anything else you'd like to offer, please do.
Just on that last point, it's that Dr. David R. Hawkins, maybe many people will be aware of the Power versus Force, is his book about energy testing or muscle testing process is fundamentally what he talks about it, which is he just talks about as a way to get answers for anything that you can ask a question that's yes or no to, and he refers to in his scale of map of consciousness, as he calls it, which I'm sure many people are familiar with. But those are not. It's like 0 to 1,000, where 1,000 is the most enlightened level of enlightenment. what another way of describing it? And he describes that if there was one individual on the planet at level 1,000, it would wipe out all the negativity of the whole of the planet. And he discusses in Power versus Force measures of certain individuals, and there was like something the last time I read the book, there was like 22 people above the level of 600 or something like that. And it equates it, so someone at 900 is, I can't remember the figures, but like 750 million people, whatever. It's more than that actually. But so when I then think about it, is that it's like measuring then that tipping point to critical mass, that there's those that higher level on the map of consciousness that you test at, where and for example 500 is the testing of the number for love. So then you've got enlightenment and but between 500 and 1,000. So more people that test higher, it's generating that tipping point. It's generating that transforming the negativity into the positivity in the planet. And it just be, and it's kind of, that's what we're talking about. So it's like there's a test, if you're open to that information, we can test it. So it's simple.
Interesting. Well, that's very interesting. Well, Jill, thank you so much for talking to us today, and go well with what you're doing and your journey and helping people with these soul journeys. It's very, very, very interesting work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil, and thanks for the opportunity to chat and be part of this pretty cool thing that you guys are doing. So Yeah, well done, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Neil.
Everybody can get in contact with you. The details on the speaker webpage. So yeah, do reach out to Jill. Thanks, Jill.
Thanks, Neil. Cheers. Bye.